This is Duke University.
Neighbors chat, visit, share sugar, and gossip. Many neighborhood interactions are just meant to be friendly. But a new study from Duke University finds that neighborhood interactions also have an economic benefit. Economist Patrick Baer led the study. He investigates the dynamics of neighborhoods. He says that interacting with neighbors on your block can pay off financially.
The way it pays off is that basically for men, what we see is a payoff in terms of, higher earnings. So we see essentially a benefit from presumably finding better jobs. Men work in high proportions anyway, so we don't see much of an effect in terms of working in general, but we see, kind of higher earnings. For women, our findings suggest that, these types of neighborhood interactions make women a little bit more likely to work in the first place.
Now, how are you figuring this out? I mean, do you have hidden cameras at neighborhoods around the country, or what makes you say that?
No, so that's actually a pretty important part of our study, which is, you wouldn't, if I just said, yeah, neighbors tend to work in similar jobs, neighbors tend to work together, you might say, well, yeah, that's not surprising. People who work in similar jobs have a similar income, they can afford to buy into a similar neighborhood, and so you would see that kind of clustering. And so a big part of the design of our study is to try to get at a clean way of really saying this is a referral effect. This is an effect of neighbors helping each other find jobs, rather than people just having to have similar outcomes in similar neighborhoods. So what we do is we basically look at the likelihood of two people to work together, a pair of individuals to work together, and we do this really sharp comparison of people who live on exactly the same block, so people who are immediate neighbors versus people who live in the same neighborhood but on nearby blocks. Here the idea is we're essentially randomizing who wound up on a block together and who didn't, who wound up on nearby blocks. And what we see is that the people who wind up on the block together are much, much more likely to work together. And we interpret that difference as the size of this referral effect.
So your research could be particularly timely here. Is there some job-seeking tip or career-building tip embedded in this study?
Yeah, I think there may be, not directly, but certainly indirectly, people are definitely finding jobs in this way. Now, what an interesting question would be whether people are more likely to find jobs in this way during difficult economic times. But certainly this would suggest that it's an important avenue through which people do find work.
What's an economist doing studying neighborhoods? I mean, shouldn't you be studying inflation and GDP and the stock market? Why are you studying neighborhoods?
It doesn't sound like economics, right? It sounds like something, it sounds like maybe sociology or something like that, and in part it is. But what we're interested in a bigger picture is, how people wind up in the places they wind up, and how that impacts their subsequent social life, their economic life.
So what does your research show about why people live where they do?
These things are not going to be surprising to people, but certainly the nature of the house itself. So if you have higher income, people want to buy bigger houses. That doesn't surprise you. People, all else equal, would like to be close to where they work. But what we also find, and this is not going to be surprising, is that the people care a lot about who their neighbors are. And that includes things like race. So people tend to, on average, have preferences that for neighbors of the same race.
You actually have some research on race that's it's in a way counterintuitive about connections between income and racial segregation in neighborhoods. It's maybe not what we would expect.
One line of that research is to think about, essentially to compare cities, so like Boston, for example. And what you see in a place like Boston is that highly educated blacks are a very small part of the population. And so you see predominantly black neighborhoods that have lower levels of amenities, high crime rates, lower school quality. You see high amenity neighborhoods that tend to be predominantly white. And so in a city like Boston, that's what you get. In a city like Washington, D.C., in the metropolitan area, you have all kinds of neighborhoods. So you have high amenity predominantly white neighborhoods. You have more integrated mixed race neighborhoods. You have high amenity, predominantly black neighborhoods. And so, what that suggests to us is part of what happens as highly educated blacks become a bigger part of the population is that you might actually get more segregation.
At some point in your academic career, you probably had the opportunity to study traditional economic topics, but you steered more and more towards neighborhoods. So personally, what was it that set you on that line of inquiry?
I grew up in essentially a working class neighborhood, and I went to school. I went to high school with a very wide range of kids from all over the Chicago land area. The mix of people that I interacted with in high school, the neighborhood I grew up in, the economic life of that city, and social life of that city, in many ways, is a lot of what kind of grabbed my initial interest. And I think a lot of what, I think there's a lot to say for seeing how, in terms of, say, dynamics, seeing how cities changed, how neighborhoods change in places that I've lived, whether that's, in the San Francisco area or Chicago or New Haven or now in Durham. It's easy when you're interested in these kind of things to observe these types of dynamics happening.
Produced by Duke University. Online at duke.edu.